Aldous Huxley is perhaps one of the most disturbing and visionary writers of the 20th century. His ability to predict, with disconcerting accuracy, the direction modern civilization could take places him alongside names such as George Orwell, although their visions of the future followed different paths. While Orwell imagined a world ruled by fear, censorship, and overt oppression, Huxley saw a more subtle, almost imperceptible danger, that of a humanity which, in its quest for comfort, pleasure, and stability, would give up its own freedom, truth, and existential depth, and do so with a smile on its face. Both wrote dystopias, but while Orwell feared the shackles of totalitarianism, Huxley feared the anesthesia of abundance. American educator Neil Postman summed up this tension by saying that Orwell feared those who would forbid us to read. Huxley, those who would make us lose interest. Orwell feared the concealment of truth. Huxley, its irrelevance. Orwell imagined an oppressed culture. Huxley, a culture that would lose itself in trivialities. Deep down, Orwell believed that we would be destroyed by what we hate. Huxley feared that we would be destroyed by what we love. Born in 1894 in the English town of Godalming, Huxley grew up surrounded by cutting-edge scientific thinking. His grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, was a renowned biologist, defender of Darwin's ideas, and responsible for coining the term agnostic. This heritage shaped his intellectual sensibility and curiosity about the impact of science on human destiny from an early age. Initially, Aldous wanted to be a doctor, but an eye infection left him almost blind for 3 years, ending his medical career prematurely. This limitation, which was devastating at the time, redefined the course of his life and, indirectly, modern literature. Unable to pursue science, Huxley immersed himself in literary studies at Balliol College, Oxford, where he began writing short stories, essays, and poetry. After graduating, he took a position as a French teacher at the prestigious Eton College. Among his students, ironically, was a young man named Eric Arthur Blair, who would become known to the world as George Orwell. Later, the two would unwittingly engage in one of the most iconic philosophical duels of the last century. After his brief stint in teaching, Huxley worked in a chemical factory, an experience that left a deep impression on him. Years later, he described that environment as the perfect miniature of a world where the logic of production replaced the human meaning of existence. That mechanical, meaningless routine sparked his critical view of the growing fusion between science, technology, and social control. In that factory setting, he glimpsed the outline of a new society, functional, efficient, and spiritually barren. Later, Huxley would describe that factory as a perfectly organized universe at the heart of an incoherent world, a capsule of cold efficiency amid human chaos. For him, that environment was more than a production line. It was a living metaphor for the new society that was emerging. Increasingly obsessed with order, productivity, and control, but increasingly distant from subjectivity, feeling, and the mystery of the human condition. That which should serve man began to shape him, molding his identity to the mold of technology. This experience, coupled with Huxley's observations of technological advances and the rationalization of everyday life, would become the fertile ground for his most disturbing work, Brave New World, published in 1932. By then, Huxley had already published several books and become part of intellectual and artistic circles in Europe. In the novel, we follow characters such as Bernard Marx, Lenina Crown, Helmholtz Watson, and John the Savage, in a global society called the World State, a totally stable system without war, hunger, or disease. But this stability comes at a price. Individuals are generated in incubators, rigidly divided into castes, and conditioned from birth to accept their role with joy. Genetics and psychological conditioning replace education and freedom. From an early age, each person is trained to like what they do, never desire what they cannot have, and avoid any thoughts that destabilize the collective harmony. In this structure, Bernard and Lenina travel to a reserve of savages outside the boundaries of the world state. There they find a woman forgotten from a previous mission named Linda and her son John, who was born and raised outside that artificial society. In bringing them back to London, Bernard attempts not only to confront a powerful administrator, but also to gain prestige from the spectacle that John represents. However, John's reaction to the new world is radically different. Horrified by the superficiality, the absence of emotional depth, and the total absence of existential meaning, he turns against everything the world state represents. Educated in part by reading Shakespeare and shaped by a life where suffering still existed, John clashes with the society that has eradicated pain, and with it, any real sense of humanity. This tension becomes the most powerful point of the novel, a collision between a stable, controlled, and comfortable world and a human being who still feels, suffers, thinks, and loves in an authentic way. In a world where everyone is happy, what happens to those who still desire the truth? What is left for those who do not accept the trade of depth for euphoria? On the surface, the world state is a realized utopia. There are no wars, disease, hunger, or noticeable inequality. Everything works with surgical precision, and citizens are happy, or at least conditioned to feel that way. Life is organized around rigidly structured castes, from alphas to epsilons, and everyone learns from birth to love their role. There's no social friction, no desire to move up or down. If something disturbs the balance, there is soma, a perfect drug with no visible side effects that dissolves any discomfort into synthetic euphoria. There is no anguish, no existential silence, only pleasure, efficiency, and continuous consumption. But perfection comes at a cost. In this system, individuals have no room for doubt, for true art, for deep love, or for any experience involving pain and transcendence. Everything is controlled, not by brutal repression, but by conditioning and pleasure. Freedom is seen as a risk to stability. Romantic love is considered dirty, dangerous, a source of disorder. Families have been abolished, replaced by artificial reproduction centers and ephemeral bonds. Everyone belongs to everyone is the mantra repeated like a mechanical prayer. Monogamy is a vice of the past. Sex is a recreational incentive. Art is censored in the name of collective well-being. Classical literature, philosophy, religion, all have been archived, forgotten, or banned as useless. John, the savage, refuses to accept this logic. For him, born outside the system, shaped by loss and doubt, pain is an essential part of the human experience. The beauty of life lies precisely in the tension between pleasure and suffering, between desire and frustration, between ecstasy and tragedy. When confronting Mustafa Mond, one of the world controllers, John hears the flawless defense of the system. Everything has been planned to ensure stability. Happiness has replaced art. Comfort has replaced truth. Doubt has been replaced by synthetic certainties. You have to choose between happiness and what people used to call high art, says Mond. Real happiness always seems miserable compared to the excessive compensation for unhappiness. Mond is not a tyrant. He is lucid. He knows what has been lost, but believes it was necessary to lose it. He knows Shakespeare. He knows philosophy. He knows deep spirituality, and he chose to banish them, not out of hatred, but out of calculation. to avoid pain, to preserve order. A world without passion is a world without collapse, but it is also a world without transcendence. Stability is maintained at the expense of the spirit. Peace reigns, but like a windless lake, motionless, shallow, sterile. When Huxley wrote Brave New World, he did not believe that his dystopian vision would soon become reality. The work emerged, in part, as a provocative parody of other modern utopias that preached scientific progress as an inevitable path to an earthly paradise. Huxley mocked the idea that technology alone would be enough to create a perfect civilization. But the years passed, the world changed, and the author himself began to rethink his position. Decades after the novel's publication, he wrote that when he created that artificial universe, he imagined that such distant scenarios would never come to pass during his lifetime, or even in his grandchildren's time. But by 1958, Huxley was no longer so optimistic. The prophecies made in 1931 are coming true much sooner than I imagined, he declared. The nightmare of total organization has emerged from a distant future and is now lurking just around the corner. What frightened him was not only technological advancement, but the way in which knowledge of the human mind, especially behavioral psychology, was being used to manipulate and shape individuals. Scholars such as Ivan Pavlov, with his classical conditioning experiments, and B.F. Skinner, with the development of operant conditioning, were showing the world something dangerous and fascinating. Human behavior can be adjusted, trained, and even reprogrammed with rewards and punishments. Skinner, in particular, demonstrated that positive reinforcement, pleasure, reward, relief, was more effective and lasting than punishment. This discovery, combined with the growing sophistication of communication and entertainment technologies, created a scenario frighteningly close to that of Brave New World. Huxley realized that, unlike dystopias imposed by force, true control could come through pleasure, that it would be possible to create a society where no one would need to be forced to obey, because everyone would be conditioned to desire what keeps them submissive. It would no longer be necessary to hide the truth if it could be drowned in irrelevancies. There would be no need to imprison or torture people if they could be distracted, sedated, and constantly rewarded. The worst kind of slavery is when prisoners believe they are free and even defend their own imprisonment. In lectures, interviews, and essays, Huxley began to warn of the arrival of a new type of dictatorship, one that did not impose pain but promised pleasure. He spoke of a future where pills could eliminate anguish, where advertising would shape desire, where truth would be replaced by non-stop entertainment. A dictatorship without tears, as he called it. A psychological concentration camp where everyone would smile, even without knowing they were imprisoned. Whether Huxley's predictions came true or not is still up for debate, but one need only look at the 21st century to see that many of his warnings have already left the realm of fiction. It is not difficult to find traces of what he feared in our most everyday habits. It is in our obsession with quick fixes, in our difficulty in enduring boredom, in our fear of introspection. It is in the way we relate to immediate pleasure and in our growing dependence on substances, whether prescription or recreational, to regulate our mood, escape pain, numb our anxiety, or simply keep functioning. The promise of constant relief has replaced the possibility of confrontation. The culture of distraction spreads like a thick fog, obscuring any deeper questions. We moved from radio to television, from television to the internet, from the internet to smartphones, and now to devices that watch and entertain us at the same time. With each leap, access to pleasure becomes easier, cheaper, more incessant. And the more pleasure is trivialized, the more truth becomes irrelevant. Not because it has been censored, but because it has been lost in a sea of images, sounds, memes, opinions, and impulses. Excess paralyzes us, and in excess, meaning dissolves. Information, instead of liberating us, disperses us. Entertainment, instead of elevating us, intoxicates us. The result is not a world of tyrants shouting orders. It is a world of simultaneous, colorful, and seductive voices, shouting offers, advice, indignation, distractions. And when everything is urgent, nothing is essential. The structure of truth, once anchored in institutions and critical processes, gives way to the hysteria of networks, the froth of algorithms, the aesthetics of indifference. Culture becomes a spectacle, and in this spectacle, the search for deep meaning seems outdated, antiquated, uncomfortable. The most disturbing thing is that this transformation does not depend on a centralized conspiracy. There is no hidden master pulling the strings. It is the very logic of reward that drives us. The very mechanism of desire, so well explored by Skinner's experiments, now repeats itself on a global scale. Stimulus, response, reward. And the more accessible the rewards, the more predictable the responses. We live surrounded by invisible levers, with shiny rewards waiting for our touch. Notifications, likes, doses, deliveries, promises. And so, what was once a metaphor involving rats and pellets has become an alarming description of everyday life. Skinner's box is no longer an experiment. It has become the world itself. The question that remains then is more personal than political. To what extent are we willing to live under this conditioning, even if it comes wrapped in lights, comfort, and dopamine? There is at heart no superior mind pulling the strings of modern civilization. No centralized plan governs our desire for distraction, comfort, or dopamine. What exists is a deep, impersonal, and uncontrollable current, driven by evolutionary impulses, reward systems, and gears that turn on their own. Rulers and ruled, rich and poor, all are subject to the same invisible forces that shape behavior, attention, identity. Perhaps the only difference lies in how each person positions themselves in relation to these forces. Some exploit them, others ignore them. Many are simply carried along. And when everything around us begins to look like a lever, it is inevitable that our gestures become automatic, that our wills shrink, that our freedom slowly empties without us noticing. The real drama is that, at some point, we accept to exchange risk for security, art for distraction, pain for stability, silence for the screen. Huxley invites us to reflect. How far are we willing to give up who we are in the name of what offers us relief? How much of our humanity do we still preserve when we surrender to the anesthetic comfort of a frictionless life? Would we really trade freedom for happiness without depth? And if we do, what will remain authentic in us? John the Savage responds with a visceral refusal. Faced with the cold and flawless logic of the world state, he chooses uncertainty, pain, transcendence, contradiction. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. It's not a cry against pleasure, but against the standardization of the soul, against the idea that a good life is just a safe life, against the risk of becoming predictable, operational, too satisfied to desire anything beyond what is already within reach of a button. Comfort is not, in itself, the enemy. The problem is when it becomes absolute, when it eliminates any possibility of resistance, of depth, of consciousness. In Huxley's final work, Island, published shortly before his death, he imagines a final experiment, a peaceful, spiritualized society where birds repeat like a mantra a single word to all inhabitants. Attention, attention, attention. This is the last call, the one that demands that, even amid the seduction of easy rewards, we remain awake. If this message resonated with you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. It shows me that there are still those who prefer the discomfort of truth to the ease of illusion. And if you want to go further, consider offering support of any amount. Your help strengthens this work and allows more content like this to reach more people before everything around us becomes just another stimulus among thousands, and lucidity is lost forever in the noise.